Hi, my name is Justin Sandefur. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development. I've been working on a question which is relatively controversial, which is outsourcing education, or using the private sector to deliver public services, but with public funding. And we look at this question in the case of Liberia, which embarked on a really ambitious and somewhat controversial, again, experiment to outsource its public primary schools to private operators. In 2016 and 2017, they got together 7 or 8 private companies and NGOs and handed over control of public primary schools to private management. Now, the logic for this is, a lot of folks will believe, and there is some evidence that private schools and private management bring greater efficiency. They can bring in additional capital and resources, but there are obviously risks. Outsourcing, can lead to cutting corners on things that weren't explicitly, specified in the contract, and people worry about things like child protection or things like cream skimming students and trying to pick the best students when private operators are maybe have too strong of an incentive to cut costs and be efficient. So we look at this in Liberia, where working together with my colleague Mauricio Romero, who's at ITAM in Mexico City, and Wayne Sandholtz, who's at the University of California, San Diego, we worked with the government to randomly allocate 93 schools, existing government primary schools, to be taken over by these private operators. They would keep the government teachers, keep the government school buildings, but private organizations would manage these schools. So we tracked these children who were already in these schools over the course of a year and see what happens to their performance. And so what we found is basically 2 things, both pros and cons. There were big gains. There were big pros in terms of learning outcomes, increases in English literacy performance, increases in math performance, about 60% faster learning in these outsourced schools relative to regular government schools. But on the flip side, some of the fears, I think, of critics about what can happen in outsourcing schemes were also realized. So one of the private companies did expel a number of students from the schools in order to reduce class sizes, fired most of the teachers as a way of trying to improve quality. And then there have been scandals about concerns about child protection and sexual abuse of children in these schools, which we can't attribute to the program, but raise worries about whether child protection is too limited with these private operators. So in sum, pros and cons. Confirmation of the idea that outsourcing can lead to these efficiency gains in terms of learning outcomes, but real concern still about the oversight and governance and other dimensions that we might worry about when outsourcing public services.